Welcome to the Education and Empowerment Podcast. In this show, our hosts explore success and advancement through education by interviewing today's top leaders in the fields of education, business, and technology in order to provide insight into what it really takes to succeed. This show is brought to you by ForStay, a SaaS-enabled online booking marketplace for student and intern housing. ForStay provides turnkey, all-in-one cloud-based accommodation software solutions for colleges, universities, and organizations. Learn more at offcampus.forstay.com and landlords.forstay.com. All right, let's get into the show.
Welcome to Education and Empowerment Podcast. On today's podcast, we have two distinguished professionals in education, Mackenzie Bishop and Chris Moloney. Mackenzie brings over 13 years of experience, currently serving as the University Partnership Development Lead for Virtual Internships. She actively contributes to the education community, empowering students and shaping the future of education through presentations and publications. On the other side, Chris Moloney is the Associate Vice President and Associate Managing Principal for Consulting at the Association of Governing Boards of Universities and Colleges. With a strong background in leadership roles, Chris helps institutions tackle strategic challenges and supports non-traditional students. Join us as we explore the latest trends and challenges in education with these accomplished guests.
Welcome to Education and Empowerment Podcast. This morning, I'm so excited and thrilled to welcome two very bright and very visionary education experts and leaders in the field that, I personally look up to, and I really enjoyed, talking behind the scenes and, learning more about your respective backgrounds. And the topic that we're going to discover today is around, return on investment. I'm thrilled and very honored to welcome Chris Moloney, Associate Vice President and Associate Managing Principal of AGB Consulting. Welcome, Chris. And I'm also excited to welcome Mackenzie Bishop, University Partnership Development Manager at Virtual Internships. Without further ado, I'm really excited to get started.
Excellent. We are too.
Yes, good to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So, there's so much discussion around, return on investment. And, I'm sure that, everybody appreciates on a day-to-day basis to discuss what's important for the student, what's important for the university. And, we could talk for hours, right? What it means in relation to higher education. I was wondering, maybe Mackenzie, yourself and Chris, just in a few minutes, help us orient us and let us know what's most important in that discussion.
Sure. So I think one of the great things about the return on investment discussion is that a lot of this, to me, it seems to be stemming from the students and what the students are asking for, and how, whether it's for good or for bad, the public kind of domain is kind of shifting this conversation. I don't know if either of you have seen the documentary that came out, I think a few months ago, called Borrowed Future, How Student Loans Are Killing the American Dream. But it's a really excellent kind of expose into the student loan debacle and how kind of crippling it is for students. But I think one of the great things is that universities are listening to what students are wanting. And as this kind of conversation continues to develop, we hear more and more research about what the public is thinking and what students and parents are thinking. There was another podcast from Inside Higher Ed, The Key, and the president emeritus of Olin College of Engineering was on. I don't know if either of you happened to hear this, but a couple of the things that he pointed out was that the research shows that most Americans feel that higher education is on the wrong path. On both sides of the political spectrum, everybody kind of agrees with that. They just have different solutions or priorities for what they think needs to be fixed. And he also talks about the Georgetown report, the college scorecard data, that shows 1 in 3 colleges in America, that the average student they enrolled 10 years ago is worse off financially today than they would have been if they had not gone to that institution at all. And so the reason I bring that up is not like as a scary thing, but I think the good thing is that universities are listening to these very legitimate concerns coming from students and from parents of how are we going to invest our time and how are we going to invest our money? And so when we talk about ROI, I think there's so many things that universities need to be considering. The first is kind of the type of student outcome that they're looking at. That can be everything from academic success, career preparation, participation in experiential learning and high impact practices, community engagement, but really kind of looking at that holistic student. The second is the timelines for student outcomes, both looking at the far down the path as well as kind of the short-term outcomes for students.
Right.
I think we all know that statistic, the age-old statistic that everybody who goes to college in general makes like $1 million more, right, over the career trajectory that they have. But students also want to know what's going to happen immediately when they finish their college degree. And then also, of course, looking at both the qualitative and the quantitative measures. So many different quantitative measures, employment rates, salaries, post-graduation achievements, and then kind of on the qualitative side, thinking about critical thinking skills, which is the huge topic with ChatGPT right now, student personal growth and lifelong learning. So I think there's just so many different ways to look at ROI and so many different parts of the educational experience that need to be considered.
Mackenzie's absolutely right. There's lots of ways to think of ROI. I just want to stop really quickly on that Georgetown point, because it's really worth mentioning that the absolute worst possible outcome, the worst possible return on investment is going to school, taking on debt and not completing. And I think that's a factor in that Georgetown statistic there. And there have been many, many people who have done that. And obviously then you're saddled with loans and student debt, and you don't necessarily have a degree that levels you up in the workforce, and so on and so forth. So that's a really important data point. It's one that we look at all the time over here at AGB in our consulting work. So in adding to what Mackenzie already outlined, I think it's really, really important to think of ROI at different levels or different scales.
Right.
You've got the global ROI of a more educated human populace. Okay. And we can talk about what that means, but I think you can imagine the more educated people are globally, generally speaking, we assume that that's better for everyone, right? We also have national level ROI considerations. You have regional and local state level ROI considerations. When we get into those conversations of scale and levels, what we're really starting to talk about is sort of the engines of innovation and the economic engines that drive the global economy, our national economy, our state and local economies, et cetera. One thing Mackenzie said that's important that intersects here is this idea of quantitative versus qualitative measures. So I just talked about innovation and sort of economic drivers and the economic engines of success and prosperity around the world, nationally, locally, regionally. That's really a lot of quantitative stuff. And I do think it's important, just to set the stage for an ROI conversation, to point out that yes, a lot of times we do get hyper-focused on quantitative measures on the return on your investment in your education. What are my earnings when I graduate? Will I have a job? What are my earnings at the 5-year mark, the 10-year mark, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Very, very quantitative stuff. But there's also so many qualitative aspects to the return on value of an education, of a college education, on a certificate, a credential, et cetera. Your overall happiness, the improvements that it makes to even your local culture. If you think of the impact that a small local college has on a small town and the vibrancy that it brings to that local community, some of that you can probably measure quantitatively in terms of the money people spend if they come to a show, or some performing act comes to town and it brings people out to come see that, and so on and so forth. But there's so many other qualitative aspects that get lost in this conversation. And so I just want to lift that up. I know we're not going to have time to dive into all of that. We don't have that much time here today. And it's a huge, complicated topic. But I do think anybody out there who's thinking about ROI needs to keep in mind, yes, there's the quantitative stuff, and that's really important, but it's those qualitative pieces that are so vital and often overlooked that I think need to be called out more often when we talk about education and outcomes and return on investment.
That's a great point. Thank you so much. Both Mackenzie and yourself, Christopher, have brought a very, important aspect, which is, stakeholders, right? Depending on, where you are and, who's discussing this and the conversations that are happening. Your own position, Christopher, you are at the intersection of, governing boards and campus leadership. I'm wondering if, you can maybe give us some highlight on what campus leaders and boards are thinking about when it comes to ROI and perhaps where are you seeing some of those, friction points and challenges?
Well, I've been thinking about that kind of question a lot lately, and I think it's really important to note that, our campus leaders for sure have been thinking about ROI for a very long time. I think what's changed is there is a heightened level of scrutiny on education for sure. Mackenzie sort of pointed that out. And there is more intentionality now, I think, in being crystal clear about student outcomes, the value of your investment in going to a particular college or a university and pursuing a particular degree. I want to, give thanks and gratitude to all the leaders out there. They have been thinking about these things. And I do think that sometimes out there in sort of this broader conversation that's taking place, it almost sounds like people haven't been paying attention at all to that. And I don't think that does justice to the very hard work that all those leaders have been putting in for so many years. I do think there's been a little bit of a shift with governing boards. And when I first got to AGB, this was more of a topic of conversation, just generally around how the responsibilities and expectations of somebody who volunteers to serve on a board at a college or university, the expectations placed on them in their role. It's no longer sort of just a figurehead type position where you kind of feel good about it and you show up for 4 board meetings a year. There's so much more responsibility placed on the boards of colleges and universities. And I think that the governing boards in particular now are much more attuned to how are we measuring our success? How are we measuring our student outcomes? What are the right metrics that we should be focusing on? What questions should we be asking as a board? There is a lot more, I think, intentionality at the board level than there was probably a couple of decades ago on some of these ROI topics. Generally speaking, what's taking place out there? What are we seeing in the work that we do with boards, with leadership teams, with institutions? I do think there is a lot of conversation happening right now around differentiation and unique value, and trying to tie that back to why is our institution, why is our college or university really, really important? What is the role that we play in the world? And really there's a marketing tie in there too, right? Like, why should you come to us? For so long, Bach and Mackenzie, the tendency was to look like your peers and or chase the peer group or the peer set ahead of you. Now I think that conversation and that focus has shifted to that's not a path to success, right? We're not going to all be able to look the same and compete for a shrinking pool of students. So how do we differentiate ourselves? What makes the value of our educational experience very unique? Why should you come to us? Boards are dealing with that question. That's a very strategic question. Certainly campus presidents and provosts and leadership teams, they're dealing with those questions as well. And I've heard a colleague of mine, I forget who it was, otherwise I'd give him a shout out here, recently say, phrase it this way: if you had the opportunity to start your college today, would you do it? Right? That's like the fundamental question around your unique value and your position in the marketplace. And that's a hard question.
Such a powerful one.
That's a really hard question, especially considering the enrollment cliff and just the demographics in general. So it's not just about the unique value of the institution, but also competing, like you say, against the thousands of other institutions out there and the other organizations that are now acting like institutions and providing education in different ways. And so I think that's a really fascinating question.
Yeah, absolutely. And you sort of just mentioned this too, but there's so much going on. So when you talk about ROI, right, it's one issue nested within a bunch of other issues. So the ROI conversation, we're feeling that so intensely now because of what's happening broadly to the higher education marketplace, which is in itself a reflection of what's happening demographically, at least in this country, with declining birth rates, a declining number of high school students, et cetera, et cetera. So long story short, there's just fewer students to go around, which is putting this downward pressure on every single institution out there to compete for a shrinking number of people. That's obviously, you can read into that, right? That's why we're seeing closures happen. We're seeing mergers take place. We're seeing different kinds of partnerships emerge. All of our institutions, for the most part, are dealing with these huge, heavy, weighty questions of financial sustainability, prosperity. How do we even continue to exist? And as part of that, what makes us unique? Why should students want to come to us? And that's where you get into this sort of outcomes, ROI sort of conversation. So there's just so much wrapped up in that. I don't think we need to belabor the point. It's just a really, really complicated topic. And I think lots of boards and leaders, especially at smaller to mid-sized private institutions, certainly, but also some public institutions, they're all dealing with the same question sets and trying to find their own unique solutions in some cases to the same core sets of problems.
Amazing, amazing. Is there anything you want to add to that, Mackenzie?
Yeah, well, I mean, like Chris said, not to belabor the point, but I think that this is an issue that's not necessarily unique to higher education. I think that there were so many institutions and like governmental institutions that were kind of seen as untouchable before and really a bit immune to very serious criticism across the board and really having it be at the top of the mind for the public. And I think that we're seeing that kind of just sweeping across the board. So I think that this is kind of like you said, it's a normal ebb and flow of what's going on and the different sort of circumstances in the environment. It's essentially a perfect storm for universities. So I do not envy the boards who are going through these sorts of conversations. It would be very, very, very challenging.
Yeah, and I would just add, I guess, over the past year, I think Mackenzie, you and I met at a conference, and we've met in between, as you've been at other conferences, as we've all been traveling around. We've been emerging out of the COVID pandemic, and everybody's been getting out there and starting to sort of interact together face to face more and more. And it's been an amazing past year getting to meet so many people in person and realize everybody's sort of grappling with the same sets of questions and issues. What's been really interesting from my perspective is meeting folks like yourself, Mackenzie, and yourself, Bach, as I've been out there attending conferences and making presentations and doing those kinds of things, thinking about the ways that our boards and our leaders and our institutions are grappling with these incredibly complex, not easy to solve financial questions, but also the existential questions that come along with that. Like, do we even have a place in the future of higher education? If so, what does that look like? Can we make the changes that we need to make? Can we do that quick enough, rapidly enough, et cetera, et cetera? All of those questions in some way, shape, or form sync back to that idea of return on investment, the future of education, et cetera. I have been so impressed by, and I'm actually curious to hear more from you about the opportunities for external partners to come in and help solve some of these problems, to augment capacity, to help deal with some of these challenges. So I guess I'd like to flip the script here a little bit. I'd like to hear more from, you, Mackenzie, and Bach on just where you see the opportunities and the value for external organizations, for third parties to come in and try to help these institutions deal with some of these questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that one of the things, like you said, the ROI conversation is so big and there's so many different elements to look at. And in simplistic terms, the student's ROI and the university's ROI for investing in something. And so I think one of the things that institutions have to be able to do is to find solutions that are going to solve multiple issues for them, because there are oftentimes a lack of funds. With the enrollment cliff, there's not as many students attending the institution. Oftentimes we're also seeing a lot of turnover. And so there's a lot of staff changing the doorpost, or however we want to say it. And so it makes it really challenging to get big initiatives off and running and making them sustainable when you have all of these different kind of factors playing into it. So finding external partners who are going to be able to solve multiple problems for you, I think, is going to be really key. So one of the things that we do at Virtual Internships, what we really know, obviously, is that students are questioning that return on their financial investment and also their time investment, specifically as it relates to their career readiness, their employability, and what their future earning potential is going to be. We also know that career readiness is one of the top factors for students who are choosing their prospective institution. And so, Chris, when you were talking about differentiation and unique value, being able to clearly identify yourself as an institution that will prepare your student for their career alongside their academics, I think is going to be really crucial. Some of the new reporting that just came out shows that over 70% of first-year students are requesting and expecting to be involved in internships and high-impact learning experiences, but by their senior year, a little over 50% only do it. And so it shows us that the students are aware of these opportunities. They know why they're important, but there's some sort of gap in what they're able to do for whatever reason. It might be their schooling, it might be finances, it might be commutes. There's just so many reasons why students can't do things, but we know that the students are looking for these sorts of experiences, and we know that for whatever reason they're not able to bridge the gap. And then also when you consider kind of that looming enrollment cliff, we have these fewer traditional age students, and so the ones who are seeking these experiences are really the ones that we want to capture into the institution. So here at Virtual Internships, essentially what we do is we offer that sort of a multifaceted solution for universities to address these different challenges, right? To address the student success outcomes and employability outcomes, to address high impact practices, participation and retention, and as well, oftentimes to look at kind of like the marketing and recruitment to differentiate yourself, like you mentioned. So that kind of boils down to a few things of what we do here at VI. We can scale opportunities very quickly. I mentioned kind of the lack of sometimes people who are at the institutions because of the turnover. It can make it really difficult to get an initiative scaled across the campus. And here at VI, we have over 250,000 internship opportunities so that we can guarantee internships for every single student that comes our way, and that we can do it to a very diverse population of students who may or may not have been able to participate in that sort of thing before. We're also looking at enhancing the employability for students. So we're not just the internship itself. We also offer a wraparound employability support service for students so that they can make sure they're developing their core competencies for their career and their soft skills, which we hear from the employer side is really kind of the skills gap that they're seeing, right? Students have these hard technical skills, but they're lacking a little bit more on the soft side. We also can see institutions utilizing this to boost their student retention and wrapping and including an internship into their retention efforts to make sure that students are able to kind of make that jump from freshman to sophomore year or sophomore to junior year. And then, like I said, lastly, we do see institutions who are looking at this as something for expanding their recruitment efforts, both for the domestic students and for the international student population, really kind of highlighting themselves as an institution that can guarantee these work-related experiences for students, and essentially kind of having a really attractive offering for those prospective students and those family members who are really expecting that their students are going to graduate and be able to transition very easily into whatever their career is. So I guess to go back to that ROI question, it's really about finding a solution that's going to be able to solve multiple problems and kind of fill multiple holes or kind of augment a lot of different goals that the institution has in one service, so that you can kind of get the best bang for your buck and the best return on your investment institutionally. And I think that that's one of the things that VI does really well, that they can be translated into a lot of different areas. But Bach, I'm curious to hear from you too, and what you think about this.
This is amazing. You know, one of the things that I'm hearing, I guess, a pattern when the discussion goes to scale, I think, you know, technology comes to my mind, and, you know, both, you know, virtual internships and Force Day is very similar in its own sort of design to understand the needs of higher education institutions. Again, similar to virtual internships, you know, Force Day evolved around the idea of student success outside of classroom. Statistically, you know, 80% of learning happens outside of classroom, and before a student comes into the campus or, you know, to where they're going to study, they're going to come and they actually are coming to a place where they live. So Force Day has evolved to create technology solutions that connect, you know, students and interns and young professionals and, you know, visiting scholars with local room providers. It is such an important aspect of the student experience overall, for, you know, a number of reasons. You know, one is, you know, a holistic development of a student is very important. So without having a place to live, it's very hard to predict almost, you know, the student's success, you know, inside of the classroom. The other reason is that, you know, the integration process, if it's a, you know, foreign student or if it's a student out of state, you know, for them, you know, to actually come and integrate sooner. I was just, you know, looking at this documentary, how a student from South Carolina flies every week to New Jersey.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have seen that, and it's, you know, and it kind of reads as if you're complaining about your commute, look into this, you know, young person. And it fascinates me because, you know, housing is such an important intersection of, you know, everything. At the end of the day, you know, thinking of the, you know, the pyramid of the, you know, Maslow hierarchy of needs, you need roof over your head to be able to like succeed in life. So at Forstay, we have developed technology solutions where we help young people to connect with local room providers, and for institutions as well to simplify their housing operations and to have that, mindset of, relaying and trusting Forstay and other similar companies to partner with them in execution of their program. So, in a nutshell, we developed, solutions like, post-COVID, one of the things that we learned is that a lot of institutions no longer were able to carry out the housing programs, because of, all the different changes that were happening in the marketplace. So what Forstay has done is develop group and custom housing solutions, which allows institutions to basically partner with us and outsource the, housing needs, where again, Forstay this is our job number one, right? Is to take care of the student. And then the institution obviously focuses more on providing a better, student experience. And in a competitive sort of, landscape of higher education, it really allows them to stand out. It really allows them to, naturally develop what they're really good at, because, post-COVID, the nature of higher education became so much more competitive, and you got to be able to, have programs in place and partners in place, like you were mentioning, Mackenzie, that are able to solve multiple problems. Again, one, ability to scale with them. The other one is, you triple and double and multiply your, enrollment, right? Numerous and, multiple examples of when a student chose another institution because of, housing. So it's very critical that, we help young people to make decisions much faster, and allow technology to help, let alone artificial intelligence is going to change certain things in that direction. But, at the end of the day, our overall goal is to provide better and safer housing experiences for students so that, they are successful at the institution. So there are a number of different ways, we help. And, I think that kind of speaks to the ROI.
This is the reason I wanted to ask that question, is because this is exactly the stuff that excites me right now. So I think it's really easy in the world that we're in the environment that higher education finds itself in right now, to kind of have a doom and gloom outlook and get too hyper focused on the negative. I don't think we counterbalance that enough. This is my opinion, with all of the positives, which is how much innovation is taking place right now to help solve all of these big, huge challenges that we've outlined already in this brief conversation. So hearing from you, Mackenzie, about this internship thing, I reflect on my own experiences and how hard it was. I had to, if I hadn't tried to make an internship happen, it wouldn't have happened, right? I had to do so much on my own as a student just to find the opportunity, because it wasn't built into the fabric of the program I was within, and so on and so forth. And it was probably one of the best things that I ever did in my undergraduate career. And Bach, to hear from you about this sort of the housing solution, just knowing how much deferred maintenance is out there, how many institutions are struggling with this oversupply of seats, of houses, of beds and housing, et cetera. I mean, what innovative and creative solutions. So it really makes me excited to be working in an industry where so much of this type of stuff is happening, tangential to sort of the work of everyday work of colleges and universities, and the work that like my membership association does. We do leadership and board development, strategy development stuff, but we don't do internships. We don't do housing, right? We don't have those kinds of incredibly impactful solutions at hand. So it's always exciting for me to hear from folks like yourselves and learn more about what you're doing to help solve the same problems that we're also working on from our perspective.
Absolutely. Mackenzie?
Bach, I'm really glad that you also brought up that very specific example of that one student. I think her name is Sophia. And because I think it grounds the point that Chris made earlier about qualitative as well, and not just focusing on the numbers, and kind of grounding it in one student's experience is really interesting. So for the listeners, if you don't know, this particular student posted on TikTok that she has a summer internship in New York. And instead of moving to New York, because it is a hybrid internship, she flies to New York once a week because it saves her money. That's the primary reason. The secondary reason is that she was looking for more flexibility and also to still be with her family and friends and whatnot. And I think it's interesting because I think her specific situation actually relates to both of our particular organizations. And What I like most about that is there was someone had commented underneath this person's, Sophia's experience. She pretty much did a short little bit on her TikTok about, here's my average day as I get ready to go to New York for my internship, and it's my first day. Someone commented, there has to be another way. And there absolutely are other ways. Now, Sophia, do I think that she would have done anything differently? No, I think she probably really liked what her solution was. It allowed her to still be in New York and still be able to be at home. And I think it was great for her. But not every student is going to have that level of flexibility that they can fly to New York on a weekly basis. Not every student is going to be able to have a housing option in New York because maybe their institution doesn't have one, or they don't have that sort of a network available to them. Or on the flip side, not every student is going to be able to find these sorts of internships on their own and guarantee that they have those placements. Right now, the data shows that the average student is applying to more than 50 internship applications in the hopes of getting one. And so I think there absolutely are or is another way to be able to do both of these things. And this is where providers can come in really, really good hands for the university to be able to provide these solutions that sometimes they just can't because of staffing issues, finances, other strategic goals that they have and whatnot. And so we can kind of, like you said, Bach, also operationalize that and kind of be able to take the lead on that and give you all of the glory and all of the credit at the institution.
That's
Mackenzie,
absolutely right.
I just want to I threw my hands up there just a second ago because you just hit on exactly what I wanted to sort of say to round out my comments here, which is that a lot of it boils down to capacity, right? And what you folks are doing, whether it's virtual internships or Forstay or any of the other organizations that are out there that are doing amazing things to try to solve these problems, you're addressing one of the biggest challenges, maybe not the only challenge or the top challenge, but one of the most kind of significant challenges for most colleges and universities, which is we just don't have the capacity to do the things that we know we could or should do to make a difference fast enough, right? And that's where these types of partnerships, I think, really come into play and can augment and supplement that capacity challenge. So yeah, just wanted to add that. Thank you, Mackenzie, for pointing that out just a second ago.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it kind of, triggers my thinking that, at the end of the day, it is about, not that specific student. It's also about us as leaders and coming together, to, perhaps hit, multiple ROIs, like you said, Mackenzie, and yourself, Christopher, as well. So, what I'm thinking is, as we sort of, wrap this, episode, I was hoping that, we can get some final, food for thought or, words of wisdom from you as leaders around, what it's going to like in the future and what we should pay attention to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar to what you just said. I think it's really institutions looking for solutions that are going to solve multiple problems or help them to get multiple goals across the finish line. Student needs are going to continue to grow and evolve. But that being said, budgets and personnel sometimes are not continuing to grow. And so we got to be able to find solutions that are going to help us to meet those different demands and to do it, like Chris said, with the capacity that you do have. So for us at Virtual Internships, that means really the guaranteed internships, the career readiness support, and that global network that we can build into the programs, and really being able to serve both on or all on the recruitment, retention, and student success outcome side, and just looking to make sure that you're finding solutions that are going to be able to serve multiple needs at the same time.
Yeah, I think those are great points, Mackenzie. So our association, we view higher education as a strategic asset. We have a whole initiative that we just launched, a national initiative on higher education as a strategic asset. And ROI and student outcomes and student success is sort of core and critical to sort of that conversation around higher education as a national strategic asset. What I would add to what you just mentioned, Mackenzie, from my observations, just stepping outside the box and thinking creatively and critically about what ROI means to your institution, right? So getting back to that idea of differentiation, unique value, who are we, what is our place in the world, in our local ecosystem of education, and so on and so forth. What does ROI mean in our context? How do we measure it? So there probably will always be this universal set of quantitative measures of ROI that are important for lots of reasons, including just federal reporting, accreditation requirements. There's reasons that we focus on employability and those types of quantitative measures. But don't lose sight of the qualitative impact and that storytelling, right? Having a compelling narrative is really critical to attracting people to your business, to whatever it is, right? So Mackenzie, you would know that, and Bach, you know that. Like, what is the story that you're trying to tell? So for higher education institutions, like I said earlier at the very beginning, for a long time, we started to get in this mindset of sort of the same story, right? Oh, it's come here, get a degree, do this, do that, and leave. And we didn't really differentiate much in our storytelling. I think we need to get past that and really think very creatively about the story that we're trying to tell about the value of our institutions and why it's going to make such a big difference for you as a student to come here, and what we're going to do throughout the rest of your life after you leave us to keep you engaged, to keep supporting you, and so on and so forth. That's a different mindset. That's a big shift from the way things have typically happened in higher education. I think about my own experience when I graduated from my undergraduate college a couple decades ago, which is crazy to think. There's been no contact, right? Like, nobody's been out there trying to say, hey, what can we do now to bring you back into the fold here as an alumnus? How can we support you with a new credential, a certificate, etc.? A colleague of mine, Joe Salucio, give Joe a shout out. He's thinking a lot about that kind of stuff in his work, both professionally in the research and the writing that he does. Don't get paralyzed by indecision. Think creatively about what ROI means to you and how you measure it. And if you need help, reach out and ask somebody like Mackenzie or Bach or myself or anybody else that's out there that's so interested in some of these issues for their advice and opinion about what to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know I wanted to make sure that our audience, has a chance to also get your contact information. But before I do so, I feel like, Mackenzie, you wanted to add something to this.
Yeah, I had a question for Chris. What you said, I think, is so absolutely true, to kind of take a beat and really kind of think about who you are as an institution, who you want to be moving forward, and what that will look like. And even like, what do we want every individual student at this institution to experience? What is a graduating senior, for example? What does that student look like? What sorts of experiences have they had? And so my question to you is, with so much mounting pressures, how do institutions find the time to have that conversation?
That's the $100 million question. Yeah, if I had the perfect answer to that, I think, I don't know where I'd be, but I'd be doing something even more different probably than I am right now. That's the question, right? Ultimately boils down to time. And so we didn't get into this because we tried to keep this conversation pretty tight and sort of focused. We understand that there's a lot of sort of side conversations and different threads we can pull on this ROI piece, and maybe we'll come back and talk about some of them. But one of the components we didn't really talk about is the time pressure, right? The decision timing that's impacting everything that happens, particularly at our smaller private colleges and universities, the ones who are most financially challenged right now. Their window or their runway for making critical decisions about their future is pretty short and shrinking all the time, right? There's only so many years that you can run a budget deficit and so on and so forth. It is really challenging, particularly when you then layer on another concept that we didn't talk about, which is shared governance, which is sort of applicable uniquely to the higher education landscape in terms of how decision-making takes place and so on and so forth. It can be really, really challenging to prioritize the myriad issues that take place on a college campus throughout a year and deal with some of these major issues. That's why it's important for boards to be present, to be intentional, to be focused in their work, to be strategic, to be asking the right questions, to be supportive of their leadership team, and so on and so forth. And that's a whole nother conversation in itself as well. So long story short, I don't have a perfect answer for you. I think it comes back to prioritization. It comes back to the board taking a strong leadership role from a strategic standpoint, understanding truly the position that the institution is in currently, and working closely with the leadership team to prioritize the investment in time and resources in solving some of these problems. And if that means finding a partner to help augment capacity, even if it's short term, then that's something that has to be elevated and discussed. But yeah, I wish I had just a quick one sentence answer for you, but it's a really great question, Mackenzie, and it's really complicated when you start to pull on all those threads and realize everything is connected to everything else. And there's no easy answer or solution to any one of those difficult challenges that our colleges and universities are facing.
Yeah, absolutely. You're totally right. And I liked what you said about being very strategic and very focused. And I heard a university president just a few months ago, who I think is really a strategic visionary in what he is doing at his institution, say that they need to be essentially ferociously focused and like, you have this goal and this is our goal, and we're going to not necessarily be distracted by other things. We need to focus and hone all of our efforts into meeting these particular goals, but figuring out what those goals are, that could be a challenge.
Yeah, I said don't get paralyzed by indecision, right? Which means that the flip side of that means that you can get paralyzed by indecision. That's the shared governance conversation, if we ever come back and talk about that in some aspect. There's a lot of ways that you can get bogged down in conversations and deliberations and so on and so forth. Most institutions don't have the time to get bogged down in those long, year-long conversations, even planning, right? You can't take a year to plan your next strategic plan or your next strategic vision or whatever it might be. Everything has to quicken. And the only way to do that is to your point, communicate really, really well with every constituency on campus about where you are as an institution, where you think you need to go, make sure the board and the leadership team are very closely aligned and so on. And then just do the work, take the chances in some cases.
That's a perfect conclusion for our episode. I'm so thankful to hear both of your perspectives on return on investment. And as you said, there's so much more to be discussed. And I look forward to, hopefully, bringing you on other episodes where we can discuss things more in detail. And until that, happens, again, I'd like to, on behalf of Forstay team, I'd like to express my gratitude for both of your time. I'm sure, our listeners are curious to contact you and to maybe discuss a, particular case or instance. What is the best way to find you?
Yeah, for us, obviously, you can find us at virtualinternships.com, or you can communicate with me directly. And I'm sure this will be in the show notes too, but mackenzie.bishop@virtualinternships.com. I'd be happy to engage in some conversation and learn a little bit more about what you're looking for at the university.
Yeah, and AGB has been around for 100 years. Our website's agb.org. That's our website we've always had. Most folks, we've got 1,400 or 1,500 institutional members. So they know us very well, but if you're not familiar with us, you can find us over there. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just search me by name, Chris Moloney, Moloney. My email at AGB, if you had a more pointed question or you actually wanted to have a more detailed conversation about something we talked about here or something else entirely. First initial C followed by my last name, Moloney @agb.org.
Excellent. And if you're curious about what Forstay does and ways we can help transform your educational institution, reach us out at about.forstay.com or listen to more episodes and get educated and empowered at podcast.forstay.com. I would be happy and delighted to speak with you about, your respective institution and ways you can transform. Reach out to me at ibr@forstay.com. Until next episode, thank you so much.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Education and Empowerment Podcast. This show is brought to you by Forstay, a SaaS-enabled online booking marketplace for student and intern housing. Forstay provides turnkey, all-in-one cloud-based accommodation software solutions for colleges, universities, and organizations. Learn more at offcampus.forstay.com and landlords.forstay.com.